I graduated from EP High School in 2011 and only went back when my little brother graduated. What I saw and experienced at that school made me never want to return. For context, this school is incredibly old. It was built in 1916 and even served as a makeshift morgue for those affected by the Spanish flu outbreak. The morgue was in the basement of the building, right below the theater classroom. Most of the basement was closed off, except for the boiler room and a storage room. There are also these long pathways with low ceilings that lead to sealed-off rooms. In one of those rooms, there's a perfectly preserved classroom left abandoned, and no one knows why. If you can shine a light through the doorway, you can see notebooks, lunchboxes, pencils, all left on the desks. It's like everyone just got up and left one day. With all that negative energy, something was bound to linger, and it has. Teachers and faculty tell stories of feeling cold and seeing things they can't explain. At first, it sounded like a load of nonsense, but the school has photographic evidence of its ghosts. There are stories of suicide, tragic accidents, and even people using a Ouija board in the basement. One day, I saw something that made me believe all of it. Back then, I was a theater kid. People gave me all kinds of crap for not playing football because I was a 6'7" juggernaut. But whatever. The theater was where I wanted to be. When I was a senior, I had a lot of free periods, so I spent most of my time in the theater, or the theater classroom. I even ate lunch on the stage most days. Sometimes I had friends with me, but I was alone a lot, mostly by choice. One day at lunch, I went into the theater, turned on the lights, pulled out my mangled lunch from my backpack, and started eating. I didn't have mobile data at the time, and I didn't know the school Wi-Fi password, so I was listening to music on my iPod Touch. As soon as a song ended, I heard a loud crash above me, like someone had fallen over with a box of silverware. I looked up at the catwalk and saw someone looking down at me. I didn't recognize them, so I waved and asked if they were okay. No response. I stood up and asked louder, but still no response. This person looked like they were standing right on the edge of the catwalk, torso fully visible. They were wearing a dress that looked like something out of an 80s prom, poofy and old-fashioned. I took a breath to ask again, but what happened next made me sprint out of that theater. The person faded into nothing, becoming less and less visible until they weren't there anymore. I broke out in a cold sweat. My armpits felt wet, and I even farted. I grabbed my backpack and ran out of that theater as fast as my giant self could move. I tried telling my friends what happened, but they just laughed and told me to shut up. After that, I only ever went back into the theater with someone else. And even then, I always had chills and felt like I was being watched. "11 years ago, my family and I lived in an extended stay hotel for a while until we saved enough to get our own place. It was a one-bedroom unit with 2 sleeping areas, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. Some people had been living there for over 10 years by the time we moved in. We made friends with some of the people on various floors, as well as a couple of the managers. It wasn't home, per se, but it was better than being homeless. A few doors down from our room lived an older gentleman whose young adult son would visit him about once a week. One day, my best friend and I returned to the hotel after shopping and hanging out. As we pulled into the large driveway, I saw a dark figure looking up at the hotel. It looked like a man and was completely black. As we passed by, it looked back at us. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could still feel it looking. I turned away quickly, feeling a sense of dread. I told my friend, "I think I just saw death." Surprisingly, he replied that he had seen it as well, and even pointed to the exact spot where it had been standing. We looked at each other and remained silent for a moment. I said a quick prayer, asking God to watch over my family and the people in the hotel. A couple of days later, there was some commotion in the hallway. My parents and I went to investigate and found out that the older gentleman who lived a few doors down had died the day before. His son, unable to reach him by phone, had come over to check on him. When he wouldn't answer the door, his son, worried, had the manager open it, and they found his father deceased. It took a few hours before they removed the older gentleman's body from the room. Later that day, I left our room to sit in the back stairwell and have a private conversation with a close friend who lives in another state. While I was there, I saw an older man walking slowly down the stairs. He was wearing blue. When he heard me, he looked up at me sadly as I looked down at him. To my shock, I realized that only his upper body was visible. He turned back around, continued walking down the stairs, and disappeared. I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe we all have a spirit, or what some call a soul. I've also experienced my fair share of strange and supernatural events in my almost 40 years of life. I had seen death before, and I've seen other things I've shared here, but that was my first time seeing a spirit leaving for the other side. Someone please help. What the hell was this? I'm not really a believer in the paranormal. I've always found it interesting and been skeptical, but after last night, I'm not sure what to believe. This story happened on November 3rd, around 4:30 a.m. I had just gotten out of a relationship with my ex. For the sake of keeping her anonymous, let's call her V. We were together for a year and a half before mutually agreeing to end things. Wanting to still be there for each other, we both agreed we'd try to stay friends. On November 2nd, we planned to hang out at the beach, so that's what we did. We went to the beach and had fun. Freshly broken up, the feelings were still there. I'd be lying if I said we didn't kiss or hug. Afterward, I dropped V off at home and went home myself. We called and texted afterward, full of excitement after our day together. Trying to be funny, I joked that I should sneak over to her place later that night so we could go for a night walk. Stupid teenager things, I know. Anyway, that's what I did. She didn't fully know I'd show up, but she knew I was serious about it. I took an Uber around 2 a.m., then sneaked over to her window and woke her up. Confused and tired, V agreed to go on a night walk with me. We began walking and talking. Naturally, there were still some feelings between us, so we started talking about that. As we continued walking, I turned down a street that led to the park, hoping we could sit and talk, but V froze. She said it was a bad idea to go to the park and that she had a weird feeling about it, so we continued to walk around her neighborhood instead. When we got back to her house, we started discussing whether being friends was healthy for us right now. We stood outside, pouring our hearts out, both of us hurting. That's when we started hearing things, like footsteps. Ignoring it, we kept talking. The more vulnerable we felt, the louder the noises became. Footsteps from all directions, movements out of the corner of our eyes. Suddenly, V stopped. She slowly walked to me and whispered, "I think someone is out here with us." Then we heard another noise, the crunch of a leaf. We jolted and looked, but there was nothing. The next part still freaks me out. After hearing that sound, we started hearing music. But it was not music. Maybe it could have been in a different language or genre I didn't recognize, but it didn't feel like music. It sounded like an imitation of it. I turned to V and her face was full of fear. She hugged me, and I felt a wave of absolute dread. Her hug made me feel sick to my stomach, like I was trapped. V let go, and we both knew what to do. She ran back to the side of her house where her window was, and I followed. The music grew louder. I couldn't think straight. All I could feel was dread. As the music came closer, I told V to get down. I pulled out my small pocket knife and told V to call the police. The music kept getting louder. It was like an itch, an urge, something pulling me toward it. My brain was telling me to go to the noise, but I fought it. It was so loud, like it was filling up my mind, making it impossible to think. The only thing I knew was that I had to keep V safe. The music sounded like it was only a few yards away from us. Something was there. I kept telling V to call the police. She pulled out her phone and froze. I kept repeating myself, but she wouldn't cooperate. The music grew louder, and I couldn't hear anything else. V finally began to dial 911, then stopped. She turned her phone off and set it down. In that moment, I felt like it was over. The noise was closing in, my brain wouldn't think, and I felt weak and terrified. I knew what I needed to do. If whatever it was approached us, I knew V was going to be kept safe. I wasn't even sure I was in control of myself. I grabbed V's hand and said, "You need to call the police. Now." It was like she woke up from a trance. She opened her phone and dialed the police. Then it stopped. The noise stopped, and the feeling went away. The rest of the morning was a blur. We tried to describe what happened to the police, but of course they didn't believe us. I called an Uber, helped her back through her window, and went home. Later we called each other, trying to make sense of what happened and coming up with possible explanations. It's now later in the day, and I'm still shaken up. I'll be posting this in different subreddits. Someone please help me. I know you'll have questions and need clarification. I'll be here to answer. Just please, I need something.